Thanks for killing time for me. Well, before I start, I think it's in order to thank a lot of people that have worked against the TPP over the last year. Mary Slater, who's been very involved in a few of our actions. Jerry Waxman, who's been our publicist for many of our actions and forums. Carolina, Dan, her husband, Forrest, the youngest activist in the Orlando Light Brigade.
Active. Yeah.
Marge Holt, who spoke at several of our events. Alan Grayson for speaking at one of our events. Susanna Randolph for speaking at one of our events. My union, the Communications Workers of America, both my local 3108 and the Communications Workers of America International have been really leading the fight along with Sierra Club against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Our local AFL-CIO passed the only resolution against the Trans-Pacific Partnership before the national AFL-CIO came on board against Fast Track at their convention last year. Am I leaving somebody out, Jerry, that we should be?
Our local Democratic Executive Committee.
Executive Committee of the Democratic Party of Orange County signed an anti-Fast Track and TPP resolution. Rich Hillwig with the Light Brigade and organized our Walmart, and many others. Mark Skobman and Terry Weeks from Tampa that were very active in the first event. Lorraine Tuliano, my union president, Steve Wisniewski. Harriet with MoveOn.org has been playing a leading role in the last few events. Our last event, we had about 75 people at City Hall on January 31st. It was a great event, very spirited.
In the rain.
In the rain.
Yeah.
2 events in the rain. 50 at the first one, 75 at the other one on the 31st. We had a little truck driving around with lights with 4 lines of text against the TPP. We marched to the Amway Center where the Magic was playing, handed out flyers. Very spirited event. I'm really proud of that event, and the Light Brigade really carried the ball as far as getting the thing organized. So I'd like to start out, and I'm going to try to fill in anything that, any of the other sections that weren't touched on. And then after I kind of touch the other parts of TPP, I'll finish up with the Fast Track, which is the process that's been used in the past to pass treaties that are basically for corporations and against people. So I want to start with this quote from a popular song from 1970 from the Quicksilver Messenger Service. I'll try to do this in a poetic voice. I'm more of a prose person myself. You poisoned my sweet water. You cut down my green trees. The food you fed my children was the cause of their disease. My world is slowly falling down, and the air's not good to breathe. And those of us who care enough, we have to do something. And that's by Jesse Farrow, and it was popularized by Quicksilver Messenger Service. And what do I do to get to the next slide? Okay. So, I'm going to hit a couple areas. A lot of what I've got here has already been covered, so I'll be skipping through some slides or running over them real quick. But on workers' rights, the Obama administration has demanded that the TPP include enforceable labor standards, but their proposal would not require adherence to the International Labor Organization's conventions, which set binding international labor rights. Rather, the U.S. proposal is for the TPP to require countries to enforce the more vague terms of the International Organization's Declaration of Rights at Work. Even so, many of the TPP countries oppose enforceability of such terms. We already know from one article that I found on the internet that Vietnam has been promised non-enforcement of the environmental and labor sections, weak and toothless as they are, for the first 5 years. Minimum wage, or average wage in Vietnam is between 25 and 30 cents an hour. So those are the jobs we'll be competing. Since NAFTA, there's been 5 million jobs lost. 60,000 U.S. plants have been closed. A leaked text of the TPP is slated to include extreme foreign investor privileges, which Rich touched on quite heavily. Under the NAFTA model, U.S. manufacturing imports have soared, while growth of U.S. manufacturing exports have slowed. I already said about the other wages, I'm moving on from there. The TPP would provide large pharmaceutical firms new rights and powers to increase medicine prices and limit consumer access to generic drugs. The mechanism for that is to extend patent and copyright law. Copyright is more for the film industry and intellectual property, more for patents in this case. But by extending patent laws for decades, that will prevent generic drugs from being produced that will lower prices. This will have a devastating effect not only for seniors and other people that buy prescription drugs in this country, but also for other countries that are part of the agreement, because that will mean that they will not be able to produce their own generic drugs. They'll have to live up to these standards and allow the corporate monopolies, who in the United States, generally speaking, the government does the research, then passes it off to a private corporation to patent it and produce it for that first period until the patent has run out, and then the generics can come in. This makes our generic drugs laws even worse, even more difficult to produce new generic drugs. TPP would empower foreign pharmaceutical corporations to directly attack our domestic patent and drug pricing laws in these tribunals that are made up of corporate attorneys. Already under NAFTA, which does not contain the new rules proposed for TPP, drug firm Eli Lilly has launched a case against Canada demanding $100 million for the government's enforcement of its own patent standards. And under NAFTA and under the World Trade Organization, a national corporation from a signatory country must go to its own government and get permission to sue another government. Under TPP, that step is eliminated, and they can sue directly. So corporations are above the sovereignty of the signatory countries. It's a blatant undermining of our national sovereignty, the sovereignty of the American people to make laws to defend our labor and defend our environment. The TPP would also empower foreign corporations to directly challenge domestic toxics, zoning, cigarette and alcohol, and other public health and environmental policies, to demand taxpayer compensation for any such policies that undermine their expected future profits. If you've ever been in a court of law, you know that evidence is limited to the domain of the case. And anything that's not generic to that domain of the case is basically said, "Oh, you're out of order." Well, the domain of the case is, does it affect the corporation's ability to make future profits? Those environmental things, those health issues, those worker rights issues, out of order. Often initiatives to improve such laws are chilled by the mere filing of such an investor-state case. In other instances, countries eliminate the attack policies. For instance, Canada lifted a ban on gasoline additive that Rich mentioned earlier, just because of the threat of the lawsuit. It also paid $13 million and published a formal statement that the chemical was not hazardous. Still hazardous in the United States, but Canada had to back down. Cases underway. This is under WTO and or NAFTA. This one's WTO. In Uruguay, under the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, including enhanced tobacco warning labels and requiring plain packaging for cigarettes. In other words, no fancy colored Joe Camel and that kind of stuff. In 2010, Australia also followed suit, following the World Health Organization's basic plan. Philip Philip Monster. Philip Morris responded by launching investor state challenges against both countries' tobacco control policies, asking extrajudicial tribunals under the WTO to order the governments to suspend plain packaging and compensate the corporate tobacco giants for losses. Even though Australia's High Court upheld the country's plain packaging laws in 2012, Philip Morris continues to use the Foreign Investor State Tribunal to try to roll back this important health policy. For years, Renco Group has operated in Peru in a town called La Arroya, the most toxic place on earth. The Peruvian government twice granted them extensions to clean up the mess, and they twice did not clean up the mess. So after they asked for their third extension, the Peruvian government took action, and ultimately what happened was they won a case. Not the Peruvians, but Renco.
Wait, what is Renco?
It's a mining concern. They've also polluted the Great Salt Lake. This is a picture of lead tailings on the left, and on the right is some of the children that live in La Arroyo. There's another picture and the overview of the valley where the town sits, a couple of kids playing, and an overview of the smokestack there. Internet freedom. This was already mentioned, but SOPA is back under the guise of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Under this TPP proposal, internet service providers could be required to police user activity, i.e. police you, take down internet content, and cut people off from internet access for common user-generated content. Violators could be as simple as creation of a YouTube video with clips from other videos, even if for personal or educational use. Best place, and what I put up here is from Expose the TPP. That's my source. A lot of this is just word for word. Some of it I've shortened a little bit or changed the wording, but that's my source. But another excellent source, if you're particularly interested in the internet aspects, would be Electronic Frontiers Foundation. Another great source is Public Citizen, Global Trade Watch. But Expose the TPP is the easiest site to use. You can get a myriad of information there with a clip.
Do you know who runs that site? What is that based out of?
Electronic Frontiers?
That exposed the TPP. Because I know that the Citizen Watch was DC.
It's not Public Citizen Global Trade Watch. It's a separate group.
Yeah. Do you know?
No, I'm not really sure the personalities involved. You know, Louis?
No, I would say there's a very small company called Google that's fighting this too, and they have deep pockets. So that's sometimes the corporations are battling each other. In this case, Google is like, we want a completely open net, and they have some clout. So hopefully that can play in our favor.
I hate the idea of relying on Google, but
Anyway, he's my friend. That's the way it is now.
yeah, but yes. Net neutrality on the internet is in big trouble right now. Just a few days ago, net neutrality is what allows, basically, content is equal. You can't make your content super fast and your competitor's content super slow and clunky. So we're losing net neutrality already without the TPP. Yes.
Yeah, like I said, I've been citing various things with the FCC because net neutrality is like what we have for radio stations. We have a radio station and broadcast things, and a lot of people don't get it. And, you're right about this. I'm very shocked by the TPP can just take the FCC and basically trash them.
Right, our laws mean nothing because we're no longer a sovereign state under TPP. That's really not much of a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
Mandatory fines, and by the way, there's no evidence required on this. If your provider is told that you've downloaded something and shared it that you shouldn't, There's no criminal court, there's no legal process, it's just, you did it, boom, you're off the internet. It's completely extrajudicial. Rich?
And I just want to add to that, with the amount of activism, resistance to these corporate policies and these, you know, these things, the amount of that that takes place over the internet, I mean, the internet, Facebook, things like that are like one of the most powerful tools of modern activism. So not only would this, lock people into felonies and stuff like that, but it's also a really good way for them to squash a lot of their own opposition.
Right, and I think that's, the writing's on the wall, that half a dozen years from now, we're not gonna recognize the internet we have now. Because it's gonna be, the provider that the services your provider wants you to see will be readily available. Those that they don't want you to see will be slow at best and maybe even just blocked. Mandatory fines would be imposed on individuals, non-commercial copies of copyrighted material, so downloading some music could be treated the same as large-scale for-profit copyright violations. Innovation would be stifled. Copyright protections could go for a minimum of 120 years. Somebody puts out a movie, 120-year copyright. Whoops. Breaking digital locks for legal purposes, such as using Linux, could subject users to mandatory fines. Blind and deaf people would be harmed by this overreach, as digital locks can block access to audio-supported content and closed captioning. The Trans-Pacific Partnership would undermine public services affecting utilities, transportation, education, and more. The TPP would include rules limiting how governments may regulate the service sector, utilities, transportation, education, and more. These rules would cover all services except those exclusively offered by the government without a fee, unless a government negotiates an exception. So, your utility bill, your bus service, anything that you're paying for could be subject to TPP rules and investor state attacks because your bus service was limited to a buck a ticket. Well, that's going to impinge on that bus company's ability to make profit. In addition, the extreme investor state provisions of the TPP would allow foreign corporations to drag government to an extrajudicial tribunal to demand taxpayer compensation for policies related to essential services such as water, electricity, and gas. Okay, there's some examples here. French water company Vivendi and affiliated companies made a deal with the outgoing governor of the province of Tucumán to take over the provincial water utility. Customers soon saw a doubling of their bills. The new governor and the provincial legislature tried to limit invoice increases, so Vivendi launched an investor state case. They won $100 million from basically the county or the state government. Undermining electrical services. Rich covered this stuff, so I'm not going to dwell on the examples here too much. Undermining gas services. Again, $133 million was one from Argentina, basically because they were trying to stabilize their gas prices. Bank regulation. The Trans-Pacific Partnership would roll back the financial regulations needed to avoid another crisis. The TPP would provide big banks with a backdoor means of rollback efforts to regulate Wall Street in the wake of the global economic crisis. The deal would require domestic law to conform to the now rejected model of extreme deregulation that caused the crisis, the financial crisis of 2008. The TPP would forbid countries from banning particularly risky financial products, such as the toxic derivatives that led to the $183 billion government bailout of AIG. The TPP would threaten the use of firewalls, policies that are empowered to stop the spread of risk between the different types of financial institutions and products. So what we used to have under Glass-Steagall, where the investment banks were separated from the lender banks, even though we've backed off from that and we're not really doing much of a job of regulating that, TPP would enshrine that and prevent our government from putting those firewalls back in place. Even the International Monetary Fund has recently endorsed capital controls as legitimate for mitigating and preventing financial crises. That's controls on capital moving from country to country. We're seeing that now in third world countries now because we're cutting back on the $85 billion a month that we were giving away to the banks. That money ended up going to third world countries for investment. With those cutbacks and that diminishing investment in third world countries is putting a real strain on their economy. Again, this would undermine the ability to regulate. Democracy. The TPP has been negotiated in secret for the last 5 years. I'll jump ahead a little bit. The Constitution calls for trade to be negotiated by the President with the advice and consent of the Senate, and then a 2/3 majority to pass a treaty. Been negotiated for 5 years with no constitutional authority at all by the U.S. Trade Representative. The text is still secret. Carolina misspoke. She said Alan Grayson got to read the whole document. He got to see one chapter in private in his office. He didn't see the whole thing. Nobody's seen the whole thing, except the 600 corporate trade advisors, and I suppose the U.S. Trade Representative. I don't even think they've shown Obama. Elected representatives have seen selected parts. I think there's a few others that have seen a chapter or two here and there, but nobody's seen the whole thing. And when Alan Grayson did get to see it, he couldn't have a pencil or a pen, he couldn't have his cell phone to take a picture, he couldn't take notes, he couldn't have his staff in his office, and he had 2 members of the U.S. Trade Representative's office standing over his shoulder.
Who said so? Who said he couldn't do those things?
Who said he couldn't read it?
Yeah, who's doing
This-
The
this?
U.S.
You told us how terrible this thing is.
The U.S.
You haven't told us
Trade,
who's
this
doing
U.S.
it.
Trade,
The U.S. Trade Representative, who is an appointee of the Obama administration, has been shepherding it through for the last 5 years. There's been several different U.S. Trade Representatives. The current one is Froman. There was an article 1 or 2 days ago. Froman and another official in the U.S. Trade Representative's office were given, I think one was $6 million, and the other was maybe 4 or 9, I'm not sure of the numbers. But they were, one of them worked for Citibank and one of them worked for Chase, or maybe Bank of America. But Bank of America and Citibank.
but to his point, it's directly related, regretfully, because I don't despise the guy, is President Obama. It's the executive branch. They're the constitutional authority to negotiate treaties, and the Congress has the authority to pass them and fund them. So he's still in the negotiating state, so whatever he wants to release, that's up to him, and he can set a criteria he wants to. So it's, you can say all these other people, it's President Obama, and write to him and say, you're disgusted. Because that's who it is.
Anyway, these 2 officers were given,
Froman got 9 million.
okay, one from was 9, the other one I believe was 6. And they were essentially given these millions of dollars as an exit from their corporate job, so they wouldn't feel so bad about having to take a job with the U.S. government and make less money. Well, I don't know about you, but.
Are they part of the 600 corporate advisors, this Froman?
Well, they're like over the advisor, yeah, they've seen the text.
They're over the advisor.
Right, that's the actual.
We don't even know how how many people are involved in this TPP that get to see the text and write the text?
We know that about 600 people, you know, maybe, we're looking at maybe 650, 700 roughly, that have actually seen the text. Even the advisors, I'm not sure they've seen the whole text, because they've got it broken down. An advisor would be on a particular aspect of the TPP, so that advisor might not have any idea what the other aspects are doing.
Yeah, that's how you keep it real secret.
Yeah. So I'm not sure that the 600 advisors have
This
any
Roman
idea.
character is helping to write this,
They're definitely helping to write the sections that they're involved
and
with.
he works basically for President Obama.
Yes.
He's working for the White House.
No, but I'll get to that. I'm gonna get to that very soon. If ratified, the TPP cannot be amended unless all member countries agree. And that's pretty much known, but, you know, who knows what the final form of it will be.
How many countries are involved?
12, but others can join.
What countries are they?
You know, I can't name them for you, but,
I can name a few:
Yeah.
Peru, Chile, Malaysia, Vietnam, Japan, New Zealand, Australia,
Singapore.
Singapore.
if you didn't say Peru,
Yeah.
Brunei,
Nobody EU.
Indonesia.
Brunei, I'm
are they
sorry?
involved?
Nobody
No.
EU.
Oh, okay.
No,
Vietnam.
there's a separate transatlantic
Yeah.
trade agreement.
But
that's
now we have
also
Japan and we have
in the
Korea.
beginning
Oh my
Stages of
God.
negotiation. See, fast track, they want to use fast track to ram both of these through.
So these 12 countries have 12 trade advisors writing this. Or
yeah,
possibly
each country has its
Trade rep.
government representatives, and I would assume
I
corporate
just wanna know how this stuff
sponsors as
isn't
well.
getting lost in translation.
Well,
Because
based,
then none of them, they all speak a different language.
based on what
Money
we've
speaks
seen-
one language.
Yeah, based
Money
on what
speaks
we've
one
seen
language,
just from
yeah.
some of the leaked reports of some of the meetings, it seems like the United States trade representatives are playing more of the bully role with a lot of the other nations.
No, you don't
Try-
say.
Yeah, I know.
As bad as it is, yes, the US is pushing to get the other countries to agree to it, and there's resistance.
Because some of them are third world nations, right? Like you said, Brunei,
Yeah.
Malaysia.
When we're talking about 40% of the world's trade covered by this agreement, I'm not sure exactly what percent the United States covers alone, but I bet it's at least 25 to 30% of
I
that.
think it's at least half of that, I think.
I'm sure, yeah,
Half of the 40%.
yeah, at least. Because, I mean, the only other really powerhouse country there would be Japan. Australia and New Zealand, you know, are just not that significant,
So strange
doing
this.
you know, in gross output like the United States would be, or even Japan.
But their elections, they can,
Oh, the vote.
they're a highly educated, motivated electorate, they can tell their governments, pull out of the treaty, we don't wanna get involved because of these tremendously detrimental policies.
There's a lot of resistance from people inside the countries.
So I have to have another meeting on the transatlantic partnership too?
Yeah, and from what I can see, even less is known about that.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I certainly don't know much
I have
about it.
like 3 files on it.
Oh my God.
I have like
Uh,
hundreds
Yeah, but
on
it's
it.
nowhere near a point where
Well,
we
it's
need.
it's in the very
Sorry,
embryonic
Jim.
stages still.
Right, it's not gonna happen for 4 or 5 years.
No.
Just to reemphasize, these corporate tribunals would trump the sovereignty of we the people, because we are actually sovereign. The Constitution says, starts out, we the people, and the Constitution is written to protect us from our government, which I'll get into in the next set here. But the corporate tribunals will trump our sovereignty,
Their wheelhouse.
our laws, and our courts. It will create a new world order where corporate rights are above human rights and workers' rights and environmental rights. Just as when the ruling over 100 years ago of Union Pacific versus Santa Clara County enshrined the idea that corporations are people, not because the Supreme Court decided it, but because a clerk who had worked for the railroads was a clerk at the Supreme Court, and he basically wrote an interpretation of what the Supreme Court judges wrote. And his interpretation was that corporations are people. And the corporations have run with that ever since. And now we have Citizens United. A little bit of a tangent there. This is not what democracy looks like. Okay, so,
Just that, you know, Jim, it's 8:30.
okay, where do I get to my next slide here? Escape, and close.
While he's looking at that, I just want to add that if a state or a local county level municipality passes a law and a corporation decides to sue them, the federal government would be the ones that defend that. So if a state passes a law that the federal government doesn't want them to pass, the federal government would be the ones actually fighting that in the investor's state case. So they would have even less of an incentive to follow through.
Well, that would happen whether we have TPP or not.
Right, yeah, yeah. But I mean, under the investor state system of the TPP. What's that?
The federal government does the work of investors. And people
Well-
don't see that the investors are actually behind.
Well, that's what I mean, like, say Florida passes, you know, medical marijuana law and pharmaceutical company wants to sue under the TPP. They wouldn't sue the state, they would sue the federal
We gotta
government.
get through this quickly, it's like, we have to actually be out of here by 9 o'clock.
Now that he's got enough for me.
Okay, so what are the constitutional requirements for ratifying treaties? And just a little aside here, there's a few people in the audience with their hands up there. I don't know exactly who those people are. I recognize a few of them. But just imagine if they're asking, what is fast track? And you'd have some people there going, wait a minute, we didn't write that into the Constitution. I know, it's not in the Constitution. But what are the actual requirements that are in the Constitution? Article 2, section, the Constitution, by the way, it is a simple document. It is 4 pages long. When you add the amendments, you're maybe up to 8 or 10 pages. Most of them are like a paragraph or 2 at most. Some of them are even shorter than that. So it's a simple document. It was written starting out, we the people, for we the people. We the people need to be able to interpret it, and it's very easy to interpret. It's clear English. It was meant to, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Article 2, Section 2, he, meaning the President, shall have power, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Why would we make it so hard to pass a treaty? Because a treaty is a deal with another country. And we have to enforce that deal with another country. It takes precedent over our laws because it's a deal with another country. So that's why it's such a strict requirement, 2/3. And the advice and the consent of the Senate. We've been negotiating for 5 years in secret with no advice and consent. Everything that has happened up to this point is unconstitutional. What is trade promotion authority? That's the same as fast track, another name for it. And why is it necessary? Trade promotion authority is a law designed originally by the Nixon administration to get around the Constitution. You guys remember Tricky Dick, some of you anyway. The only president to ever resign from office. The only president to ever appoint a vice president, which then became president, after his vice president resigned in disgrace. That's where it comes from. That was Gerald Ford, and his original vice president was Spiro Agnew.
Sadly, today Nixon looks like a liberal.
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
Nixon, you know, his resignation was based on sending people in to spy on the Democratic Party National Committee in the Watergate Hotel. So Nixon was, you know, forced to resign in disgrace over spying on a few politicians. President Obama is spying on everyone.
That's off topic.
That's the Fourth Amendment. It's another talk, but the Fourth Amendment is also very clear. It's about, I think, 1 or 2 paragraphs. And it says that you've got the right to be safe in your papers and your person, and that if the government wants to search you, they need to get a warrant from a judge. Otherwise, they've got no right. Unless you happen to be one of the 300 million people that lives in the United States and the millions of others that live in the rest of the world that have done absolutely nothing wrong, but they're going to spy on us anyway. Every keystroke, every phone
Thank
call.
goodness, I'm in favor of it. Now let's get on.
Okay, let's contrast the constitutional process and the fast track process. The Constitution requires the advice and consent of the Senate. It goes through the normal committee process and the normal Senate rules. Amendments are possible, discussion is possible, there's a free and open debate, and there's a 2/3 majority required to ratify a treaty. Fast track says, forget that. We just need a simple majority vote in the House and the Senate of those present, 50% plus one. It has a strict timeline, up to 60 days in the House, and after it gets through the House, it's got up to 30 days in the Senate. No amendments are possible. Normal rules don't apply. You can't slow it down in committee or filibuster. Debate is limited to 20 hours in each House, and it requires a 50% plus one to pass it. Now, in the Constitution, those guys in the first slide actually set up a process. If you don't like what's in the Constitution, there's a way to change it. You need a 2/3 majority of the House and the Senate, or a 2/3 majority of all the state legislatures, in order to propose a constitutional amendment. If you get that 2/3 majority, you can then have a vote. And you need a 4/5 majority to do a constitutional amendment. So there's a process there. It's not like we have to make something up because we just have to get this trade treaty passed.
Jim, how does the fast track even exist? Because I was just gonna go to that. It's clear in the Constitution, the amendment, that right, but somebody had to challenge that at the time.
Nobody's ever challenged it.
Well, then it's time somebody like the Sierra Club
Yeah,
challenges.
and I asked Alan Grayson this at the talk that he did for us, and he agreed that it's definitely something that could be challenged constitutionally, and not only that, but NAFTA and the WTO and the other treaties that have been negotiated under fast track could be
Yeah,
very easily
but you know
challenged.
what, some of the simplest things you think should be, why hadn't they done it before? Well, they didn't do it before, so that's something I would put in $100 right now.
We can talk about that later, but I'm gonna try to just stick with the
Okay.
process. I definitely have an opinion on it.
You have an opinion, Jim?
I do. These are facts, but I do have my own opinion on that. The Constitution requires a 2/3 majority. Oh, okay, I've covered that. We've got the I'm counting on you, don't discuss. And then we've got somebody pulling a rabbit out of the house and say, don't look under the table. This is on a different subject, but it's the same kind of thing. The Constitution also requires the president to take an oath of office. His is in the Constitution, and this is what it says. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Every congressman, every senator, every elected official, every postman takes a similar oath. Again, the Constitution is a concise, 4-page document. It is intended to define, divide, and limit the powers of the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of government. It is written in plain and easily understood English. It starts out, we the people. We need to know what it says, and we need to get our people that we've elected to enforce it. The secret negotiations on the Trans-Pacific Partnership have gone on since early in 2009 and are without constitutional authority. There has been no advice and consent from the Senate. The Senate has not even been allowed to see the text. Upon passage of the fast-track legislation in 2002, Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, a fierce defender of congressional prerogatives, not so much the Constitution, because he didn't mention it either, but he likes the congressional powers.
You
Or
said
he did.
that was passed in 2002, Nixon wasn't president.
No, it was passed under Nixon. NAFTA was done under Clinton. There was a lapse. It was reintroduced in 2002. It lapsed again in 2007. There might have been another set of few years where it was instituted, I'm not sure.
I think the Nixon fast track was strictly for China, one time only, and then they brought it up now to give them unlimited fast track powers in 2002.
I wouldn't say I'm authority on that. It wouldn't surprise me if that's correct. Generally speaking, once you pass it, it's good for any treaty that's up. And generally speaking, they pass it for a 4 or 5 year period, and it can be renewed once it's passed. Okay, so what Robert Byrd said, he waived his copy of the Constitution and warned that fast track wrests from the Congress its right to strengthen and protect America's trade laws. However, it is not the rights of Congress that are taken by fast track. It's the rights of we the people to live under the rule of law as defined by the Constitution. Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi have come out against the current version of fast track. Harry Reid was basically, his quote is, "Not now. I'm not going to bring it to the floor. Not now." Nancy Pelosi's comment was she doesn't like the currency provision in the TPP, so she's against this version of fast track. They're both leaving the door wide open for another version of fast track, which I believe is being worked on now. They have not spoken out against the unconstitutional nature of fast track. Only Alan Grayson and a few others have. And it's not at the top of anyone's agenda, including the movement against the TPP.
Except here in Orlando.
Well, the leadership of the movement against the TPP is not making the Constitution an issue at this time. Ms. Pelosi has previously expressed doubts about the current version of the bill, which doesn't have a Democratic co-sponsor in the House, and she has been skeptical about free trade measures in the past. And then Harry Reid's exact quote, "I think everyone would be well advised just to not push this right now." 53 House Democrats have joined the new Democratic coalition to push for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Investment Partnership. There were, yes?
Sorry, I hate to interrupt. We just have to be out of here in 15 minutes or
Okay.
else they charge us.
Okay,
And
I'm not far from being done.
Okay, and I just want to make sure also while Dave's not here, it's his birthday today and we have some birthday cake back here, so we just wanted to sing a quick.
Louis, you buy him a beer?
Yeah, I
Red light, red light.
Yes.
Okay, fast track is designed to limit debate, prevent amendment, and circumvent the Constitution. There are a myriad of excellent reasons to oppose the TPP and the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership. The TPP, however, can only be stopped by stopping fast track. We have known from the start that it could not pass the Senate by a 2/3 majority. But if fast track is passed, it can very easily get 50% plus one in both houses. So if we stop fast track, we stop the TPP. Corporate backers have known that since the start. They've never even attempted to use the constitutional process. They've always figured, well, we'll negotiate it, and then we'll slip past fast track through late one night, maybe Christmas Eve, I don't know. They have been banking on fast track authority for the last 5 years. They've been negotiating without constitutional authority for those 5 years. The debate on and this is my speculation now, the debate on fast track will be covered by the corporate media as if ratification of these treaties will significantly improve global trade and the U.S. economy. That's a lie. Their own figures show over 20 years it will increase global trade by 13/100%. That works out to an average worker in this country on a weekly wage of 65 cents. 65 cents a week, and no more generic drugs? You heard all the other stuff. Okay. Fast track must be stopped by exposing it as the unconstitutional fraud that it is. Otherwise, it will lurk in the shadows, apologies to the werewolf, biding its time until it pounces at our throats. The corporate media will frame the debate in terms of jobs and an improved economy. The contents of the TPP and the TTIP will be largely ignored, After all, they are secret and only a few chapters have leaked. So that the corporate media can say, well, we don't really know what's in it. How can we discuss it? What we're talking about is jobs, the economy, fast track. They will focus on trade boosters, and they'll use quotes, and they'll evade the need to investigate or even state the actual facts. All the pro-trade press coverage will give political cover to enough representatives to allow passage of fast track. The same exact strategy that got us NAFTA and the WTO. Don't talk about the Constitution, stop fast track, we lose by 50% plus one, and then they go through and they pass NAFTA and they pass the WTO by 50%. I think it was actually plus one with NAFTA.
Yeah, NAFTA
Maybe plus 3 or 4 with WTO. I'm almost done, Jerry, I don't take questions.
Well, it was just one.
It was, yeah, I think NAFTA was
It's
just
always
one.
just one.
And it's 50% plus one of those present too. So they might do it like on Christmas Eve, when only half the members are present. So we gotta kill fast track so it doesn't come back. We've gotta put pressure on our Congress by building a mass movement of citizens to hold them to their constitutional oath. With fast track passed and no constitutional challenge, the TPP and TTIP can be voted in with a simple majority. No need to disclose the text of to the docile corporate slugs that will vote for it. They plan to keep the text secret for several more years. I've heard 4. This is from Laura Waller with Global Trade Watch. So they're going to ask to have it voted on after they get fast track through, and keep it secret for 4 more years after the vote. So those Congress people, those corporate slugs I'm talking about, they won't even know what they're voting on. That could change, but I don't expect it to. Unless fast track is exposed as unconstitutional, we can only postpone its passage. The corporate coup d'etat that is the TPP and the TTIP will be lurking, waiting to usher in the new corporate world order. Stand up for the Constitution. No fast track, no way, not ever. Thank you. So, how much time do we have left?